Moving on, Module 3, Topic A, the beginning of a new module, Module 3, which is Global Sports Spectacles, and we're changing. We're moving from Topic 2, which is Global Sport Bodies, into the realm of the Global Sports Spectacle. And what I mean by spectacle is this. Large, big-scale mega events or spectacles, spectacular events that are an important part of the global sport economy, of global sport culture. And the argument within this module, and we look at three different elements of the global sports spectacle within this module, that they have very real political, cultural, economic and spatial dimensions that are related to the globalized nature of society. And so today, or within this topic, what we're looking at here is global sports spectacles and their relationship to this. International relations, or what we could say is international politics, the relationship between the various nations that make up the global community of nations. And the argument is that global sports spectacles play an important role in shaping nations' identities and their presence within this international community of nations. And by sports spectacles, global sport mega events, what we really are talking about is two things. There are other examples, but we're going to largely focus on either Olympic Games or World Cups. But there are other major mega events, global sports spectacles, Commonwealth Games, Super Bowls, etc. But as I said, we're going to focus on these two here, and primarily the Olympic Games, I would say, because they arguably are the most high profile of these global sports spectacles, and they clearly demonstrate the relationship with international politics and in international relations. And clearly the Olympic Games, winter and summer, have an important effect on the way that international relations are played out. And this is what I want you to get from this particular topic, and then we'll move on to other themes related to global sports spectacles in topic B and C within Module 3. So that's what we're getting into. Here's your lecture outline. We're going to look at the UK, China, Russia and Qatar 2022, not 2020, mistake there. There we're going to look at, and we're going to really interrogate and use this concept of soft power, which you may have come across before, but maybe not. And soft power is an important thing when it comes to understanding international diplomacy, international relations, and the position and influence a nation has within that global community of nations. So soft power is a lot of what we're going to be talking about. Get started then, international relations and soft power, attraction and persuasion. But before we get to that soft power, I want to look at international relations and make sure you understand what I mean by this term. Very basically, international relations is the nature of the relationship between independent states, nations and peoples. And so international relations tends to reflect the nature of global society, the way that nations are interrelated or interact or are related to each other tends to be a reflection on the state of play within global politics. So if we go, for example, back to the 1930s, international relations were very fraught. It was a huge time of conflict, tension, hostility between modern nations, between largely Germany, Japan and the US, France, the UK. So the modern nations were very tense times in the 1930s. You could say that international relations were fraught with potential conflict and leading up to the Second World War. So clearly, if we went back to the 1910 to 1914, 1917 era, again, that would have been a time of fraught with conflict, tension and potential hostility on the horizon. So if we think about that, what goes on in those times largely is what is called traditional diplomacy. And traditional diplomacy takes place between leaders or administrators of nations. They're diplomats who talk to each other, often in private, and we don't really know that they're engaging with each other, to try and sort out tensions or conflicts or smooth the relationships between nations. So that's what traditional diplomacy is. And the classic example from the 1930s is Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, coming back from Berlin in 1938. In fact, I think he was coming back from Munich, it was Germany anyway, holding up a piece of paper that he said was a signed declaration by Adolf Hitler that Britain and Germany would not go to war. So he said, I believe it is peace in our time, and he picked up this piece of paper and he demonstrated it to the world, to the newsreels, to everyone. So this was diplomacy in action and was supposed to prevent a future war. Well, as you know, Hitler reneged on that agreement, and within a year and a half, 2 years, Britain, or a year actually, Britain was at war with Germany because the Germans invaded Poland. Now, so traditional diplomacy doesn't always work, and the tensions aren't necessarily smoothed over, and they can lead to conflicts arising. Now, if we go forward a little bit into the post-war era, post-1945, into what we call the Cold War conflict, and Cold War is a very good way of describing this. This was a time when the two global superpowers, the USA and the USSR, both had the nuclear option. Both could wipe out the other country, and in doing so probably the entire planet, with their nuclear arsenal of weapons. And so there was a Cold War, a frosty relationship between the two. However, this didn't go into a full-scale hot war because of the threat that the nuclear deterrent, or the nuclear option, had, because it was so powerful that outright warfare using nuclear weapons could destroy the whole of human civilization. And this is what Neville Shoots on the Beach novel spoke about as well. So there was this Cold War, this tension, this frosty relationship between the two that was carried out and that was mediated along closed diplomatic lines, rather than a full-scale hot war between these nations in conflict. And so, interestingly, the nuclear deterrent had the deterrent of stopping a full-scale war happening, but instead the conflicts and the tensions between these two countries was really negotiated behind the scenes by traditional diplomacy. And this is bringing it forward. But here we have John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, who's probably the lead international diplomat representing the American government at the moment. And this is what he does. He manages international relations by representing American national interests in relation to other diplomats from competing, or from countries that may be allied with the US or may be in conflict with the US. So there's diplomatic relations in a traditional sense going on with our friends and foes all the time. So that's how the international relations tend to work in this traditional sense. However, well, I should also mention that there are now international agencies or organisations such as the UN, which also help get involved in facilitating these traditional diplomatic ties. However, within this context as well, there are other ways that nations try and forge better relations in the international community. And this is the way that Nye describes it. And Nye captures this nicely here. What he says, that nations use culture, ideology and institutions, what he says are intangible power resources, to shape the way that the nation is viewed by the international community. It's shaping the public, globally public view of what the nation is. So in this sense, it's called public diplomacy that has come to the fore, not just traditional behind the scenes diplomacy, but public diplomacy as well. And here's another way of thinking about it. It's the communication with foreign publics, foreign nations and the people within those nations, to positively influence their views and values related to the nation. So the US would engage in public diplomacy to change the way that people around the world viewed the US, the nation and its people, to portray it in a very positive light, so people around the world would view the US, its policies and people, in a positive light. That is public diplomacy, and clearly it's public. It's not done privately behind the scenes like traditional diplomacy. It's out there shaping the views and values of these publics around the world. Here you have the person in charge of this for the US at the present time, Richard Stengel, who is the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs for the Obama government. So that's his role, is to engage and to further public diplomacy for the US. So the role and function of this is, as it says, to positively influence the way a nation is perceived by people around the world. So we can go back in the US sense to 1963, to John F. Kennedy going to West Berlin. So here, at the very height of the Cold War, Kennedy goes to Berlin as a form of public diplomacy in order to really advance the image, the reputation, the significance, the influence of the US to the rest of the world. It's not just about him meeting Berliners, it's about him doing something that publicly demonstrates America's significance to the rest of the world. And so it's a very classic and very historic form of public diplomacy for an American leader. And it's very well known. But it takes various forms, public diplomacy. And here are the three that we can refer to. Media and news, communicating values, overseas programs and exchanges, transmitting values, and high-profile events or celebrity representatives embodying values. So those three ways that nations can engage in public diplomacy. Here's the first one. Communicating values. BBC, Russia Today, Al Jazeera, Voice of America, all these news outlets have some form of relationship to the home state, and to some degree they advance the views, values, image and reputation of that home state, be it the US, Russia, Qatar or UK. So clearly we might not think about news outlets as being forms of public diplomacy, but if they are state-sponsored, to some degree they are. Overseas programs and exchanges, transmitting values. Think about the amount of students that go from one place to another, all the different programs, the Fulbright fellowships, etc., where we encourage the spread and the interconnection and the exchange of students from certain parts of the world to others. And here we can see the number of Chinese students in the US, which are encouraged by the US, because this form of public diplomacy is get Chinese students over to the US to learn the American way. And that's why there are significant numbers. It's a part of that public diplomacy function. Thirdly, embodying values. These high-profile events or celebrity representatives of the nation state. So here we have the Obamas visiting Africa. They are, just like John Kennedy was in 1963, the embodiments of public diplomacy for the US in this particular moment through their high-profile and highly mediated visits. So they become ways that the positive image of the US is projected to nations in Africa, and also because of the high-profile nature of these visits to the rest of the world. But it's all very good talking about public diplomacy, whereas really what I think we're talking about, and what the same thing as public diplomacy is, if not very similar, is this thing called soft power, which Nye came out with in his book 2004, Soft Power, The Means to Success in World Politics. And I really think Nye here is talking about the same thing that when we're referring to public diplomacy in those three examples that we just referred to. But soft power is positioned in contradistinction or in contrast to hard power. Now hard power, according to Nye, is this. Hard, it's coercive. It's a coercive force. It's the influencing the behaviour of others to get the outcomes you want. So you are forcing other people, other nations, through various means to do what you want to do. It's coercive, it's forceful. That's what hard power is. And so there we can think about military force. countries going into other countries to get what they want. Sometimes the police or secret agents are used in this harder coercive power, and sometimes it's economic sanctions. So we've got economic sanctions on various countries, including Iran. So we impose those coercive sanctions, economic ones, to try and get what we want, the US wants, from Iran, for example. So this is very much coercive, forceful, trying to influence behaviour to get what the nation wants. Now, that's very different from soft power. It's not forceful or coercive, it's about attraction and persuasion. So you attract another group, another public, to try and persuade and encourage and trying to softly influence, persuade them to do what you want, to think what you want about your country and to act in the way that you would want. So it's a soft persuasion as opposed to a hard, forceful persuasion. Very, very different. And Nye argues that those forms of public diplomacy are expressions of soft power. They're trying to persuade other nations into thinking about the US in a particular way and acting in a way that the US wants them to act. So soft power, it's the ability to shape the preferences of others and align those preferences to your own. You're not forcing it, you're encouraging them, you're trying to persuade them through these cultural, ideological, institutional means, through the presence of a celebrity figure such as a high-profile politician or his wife in a particular country to try and persuade the value of the US and the value of the US way of doing things. So soft power is clearly very different, and it's become increasingly important within diplomatic circles because hard power, as we've seen previously, can lead to the destruction of the world because we've got the capability to destroy each other. So soft power and public diplomacy has become much more to the fore in trying to generate influence of one nation within the global community of nations. So this is Monocle, who do an index every year of soft power. They work out which country has the most soft power in the world, and you can look up 2014's view and 2013. You can see which countries are at the top, and this is the core aspects of how they derive their index: business, innovation, culture, government, diplomacy and education, and these are the subsections of the power, soft power metrics. But bringing those together and comparing it once more, just think about this. The aim of hard power is domination, command and coercion, and it's using military force or economic sanctions. That's very, very different from this soft power. It's all about trying to attract and persuade people to your particular viewpoint, and it's realized through the dissemination of values, institutions of culture. It's a cultural form of power as opposed to a military or economic form of power. It's trying to influence hearts and minds rather than coercing or forcing people into doing something. As I said, soft power much more to the fore in diplomatic circles today than how hard power is. And in many respects, what you're seeing with soft power is a form of nation branding, turning the nation into a brand. It has a particular identity or meaning, a positive one that makes it attractive and appealing to other nations, and also aspirational to other nations. They would like to be like this nation. So soft power and public diplomacy are all these strategies through which a nation is branded in a positive light. The meaning, value and reputation of a nation are constructed in this way. And as I say, it's all about influence and persuasion, because by positioning a nation as being attractive, appealing and something that you would aspire to being, it's more likely that a nation will have other nations want to follow it and agree to the way it's viewing the world or its policies, its outcomes, its strategies. So it's likely to get support from other nations because it's viewed as being attractive, appealing and aspirational. So that nation will get the outcomes it wants because other countries will want to follow it. And this is what Nye says here. And that's why soft power is key in diplomatic terms. It's something that we view as a nation on a pedestal. It's got a very positive national branding, and as a result, we want to follow it. We want to do what it says. We want to acquiesce to its wishes. We want to give it the outcomes that it wants. So if we think about the US as an important, soft power is important to the US, and it communicates its soft power, as you notice here in the ranking of national brands in 2012, the US was 1. It has, according to Anhalt National Brand Index, it was the top national brand, the top nation with the most soft power. Where does it get it from? By communicating its values, freedom, democracy, its institutions, democratic capitalism, republicanism here, and its culture around the world. And in doing so, it communicates a very positive image of the nation. And this is a long quote, but I think it really teases out why the US is so important and has such high levels of soft power. Because in a modern information economy, the US's top diplomatic asset is the fact that meanings are communicated around the world 24/7. We live in that instantaneous global communication age. And since its film stars, celebrities and sporting events are downloaded, streamed and broadcast anywhere in the world, you can see why that view of the American way of life is communicated 24/7 instantaneously around the world. And therefore, is it any wonder that within this modern information economy, the cultural economy that dominates that, i.e. the US, also dominates, has the highest amount of soft power, because it dominates those systems. That modern information economy is largely driven by US products, US culture, US institutions and US values. So therefore it's got the highest levels of soft power within that context. As the world's leading military power, it has the most hard power, but also I would argue, and so would Basulto and so would Nye, the US also has the most soft power of any other nation within the world, and it uses its soft power regularly and routinely in all different ways. However, one thing I would question is this: does it use it through sport? It uses it in media and culture, but I'm wondering, and we can think about this as we go through this topic, whether sport is an important part of American soft power strategies. But as I said, we'll pick that up maybe later, and certainly within your discussion for this topic, you're going to have to think about that issue as well. But let's move on. Let's talk now about the relationship between international sport and soft power. And we're going to do that by focusing largely on the UK context within this section, because within the UK the government has clearly recognised the importance of soft power and its relationship to sport in furthering its own forms of public diplomacy. It's clearly there. So we need to look at the place of sport within the UK states' initiatives. And Olympic sport is largely organised by UK Sport, which gets involved in it, funds athletes, funds training programs, funds facilities, etc. for these reasons. One, because it wants to encourage elite success. The government wants people to win medals for Britain in order to enhance the standing of the UK. But secondly, it wants it to do that because success increases participation. People viewing gold medal winners at World Championships or Olympic Games encourages others to participate. And as a result, what that does, it widens the talent pool, so there's likely to be more people doing it and more elite success, and also it leads to the health benefits of the nation. Now that's a hugely contentious thing, whether actually this does improve the health of the nation, but I think what it does, elite success does lead to this thing of making more people and making the talent pool more competitive and therefore likely to be more successful. So what all these three things do, this cycle, and on that they call it the virtuous cycle of elite sport. Elite success leading to more participation, more competition and more elite success adds to the soft power that Britain possesses, because these are elite successes at the world level, and more attention, more positive identification is linked to Britain because of the success at the elite level of these athletes. British politicians do recognise the importance of soft power for British diplomacy and the image of Britain abroad. And this is just one of the latest documents that came out from the British government, Persuasion and Power in the Modern World, in which they talk about the role and function of soft power within their diplomatic strategies and why it's important, why they need to enhance here their soft power assets. This is the UK government talking, why they need to do that. And I'll just go through these quickly, but these are the reasons they perceive it being important. Here, securing greater protection for the UK citizens by reducing the likelihood of attack, building alliances and increasing international goodwill. By having higher levels of soft power, other nations and the negative aspects in other nations, they're less likely to perceive UK citizens as someone who they want to attack. So the argument goes that soft power reduces hostility towards the UK. It wins friends and supporters for the UK's views, values and strategies. And it deals with threats that can only be tackled internationally. Moving on, it says here that it would improve Britain's trade overseas. It would promote large-scale investment flows. So it's saying a positive view towards the UK, derived from its soft power, encourages inward investment from outside into the UK. Views it, or it paints it as an attractive place in which to invest. And also internal soft power as well. The argument is that higher levels of soft power help to support the internal cohesion and the social stability of the nation. So the feel-good factor may be derived from abroad, but also communicates to the home population, creates and nurtures and helps to reinforce social stability within the nation, a harmony within the UK setting. So that's the argument of the British government why soft power is important, but they recognise within the same document that sport is an important part of that process of nurturing and generating and creating that soft power, because sport is one of the UK's most accessible and exportable soft power assets. It's quite remarkable, don't you think, that the government is talking about soft power and its relationship to sport in this way. And these are the ways that soft power is important to the UK government. Number one, and getting back to what we talked about previously, UK athletes achieving world-class success, all these people, be it Andy Murray, Jessica Ennis, Mo Farah, demonstrates its status as a leading sporting nation, but not only a leading sporting nation, but a leading world nation. So that improves its identity, its ability to attract or persuade others of its significance is helped to be created through sporting achievement. Secondly, the presence of UK citizens on governing bodies at the world level of sports, be it IOC, FINA, IAAF, you name it, demonstrates again its leadership as a sporting and nation within the world more generally. So they try to position UK citizens, UK dignitaries within these governing bodies, just like athletic success as administrative status helps to reinforce the perceived significance and importance of the UK as a nation. Thirdly, now this is something I think is interesting, and we'll talk about it later in the course, in the last module actually, that there's wide-ranging sport programs and schemes in developing nations that UK Sport International, it's an offshoot of UK Sport, actually runs. So it's a creation of goodwill within all these developing nations by the UK funding sport programs for developing communities in these nations. And if you think about that, it's not elite level sport, it's grassroots sport funded by the UK, which is sought to try and improve people's attitudes and create a positive identity for the UK, and people to have a positive relationship and perception of the UK. So it's using sport very much at the grassroots level for public diplomacy, soft power strategizing. But what we're going to be focusing on a lot here is this. The hosting of major sporting events is a key aspect of the UK government's soft power and sport strategizing. Now, clearly the most clearest example of this is London 2012, but also Euro 2020. The semi-finals and finals are going to be held in London. The UCI World Track Championships in 2016. The UK government is very, very keen and spends a lot of money investing in trying to secure the hosting of these major world-leading tournaments, because it's thought to demonstrate once again, here it is, UK is a leading sport nation, it's a leading nation around the world, it's somebody who needs to be valued and taken seriously. So in all those ways, be it athletes, administrators, development programs, or major sporting events, clearly sport and soft power in the UK setting are closely linked. It's not only high-profile events, it's also high-profile competitions, such as the Barclays Premier League, which Richard Scudamore, the CEO of it, said it makes people feel better about the UK, it being communicated all around the world because it's highly admired internationally. So even the Barclays Premier League helps to contribute to that soft power. However, what we're focusing on, this is the week on global sports spectacles, so we're focusing on those mega events, the hosting of such events as part of this public diplomacy or soft power strategizing. Because the argument goes that hosting and even just bidding for those events demonstrates both internally and externally the significance and the importance and the seriousness of this sporting nation. So that's why these events are significant. There are significant resources for soft power and significant strategies of public diplomacy. And according to Cull, why this is because they're an exercise in public diplomacy for prestige. Because what you're doing in securing the hosting rights to these major events is trying to further your prestige or standing within the world community of nations. And certainly that's what happens if you are fortunate enough to secure, for example, the London 2012 games or the Euro 2020 finals, which is a big thing within the football world. But it's prestige, status, therefore soft power and influence that is why they're important. So that's the importance of the hosting in general, but we also need to think about the specifics of why they're important. And oftentimes in terms of contributing to soft power strategies. And opening and closing ceremonies play a key role here. We may think they're a bit of fluff, but they're important forms of public diplomacy. For example, the opening ceremony and closing ceremony, for that matter, of the Olympic Games. The world's attention is on the host city and on the host nation, and it gives a great opportunity for that nation to brand itself to both its local audience, its home audience, but equally importantly to the whole world as well. It's a branding exercise, a form of soft power public diplomacy that is resulted or created by the way that the nation is staged. They stage the nation, they perform the nation for this mass audience. And we can see this as an example from Sydney 2000 Summer Olympic Games, where the image of Australia was presented to the world, and it's done so to make it an attractive and persuasive vision of the nation designed to improve its standing around the world. That's a key thing, to make it more appealing, more attractive, and have higher forms of soft power as a result. So of course you're going to project an image of the nation that is positive and designed to attract, I should say. But this goes back, to the history of the Olympic Games, and we can think about Berlin in 1936 when Hitler attempted to do this. He was attempting to use the Games to further the soft power of the German National Socialist regime of Hitler's Germany. Now, whether it was successful or not is debatable, but Jesse Owens was thought to have interrupted this, but largely to certain parts of the world this was a very important branding exercise for the German nation. Similarly, Soviet communism in 1980, the opening ceremony of the Moscow Olympics in that year was a way that Soviet Russia tried to brand itself to the rest of the world as a communist and collective focused state. And quite understandably 4 years later, at the Los Angeles Olympics, a similar type of public diplomacy, soft power strategies were adopted by the US in the way that they tried to position America as an attractive and persuasive nation within the international community of nations. So you can see this is nothing new. And within the Cold War you had this tit for tat, communism against capitalism type nation branding, but it's clearly something that continues to evolve and to continue to be a part of the Olympic spectacle. And I think this is clearly apparent, or was clearly apparent, in London 2012, and the government, the UK government, even identified these various aspects of soft power that they said were derived from the London 2012 spectacle, the Games as a whole, because it showcased the UK as the home of cutting-edge technology, innovative infrastructure, cultural and political individuality, and I'll get back to that in a sec, management and organisational skills, volunteering culture, the enthusiasm of the audience, and a progressive and egalitarian attitude towards disability, because they included the Paralympics in this as well. So all these things were the sources of the soft power through which the Olympics helped depict the UK as a leading member of the world community of nations. So that's how they saw the role, the soft power function, the public diplomacy function that the Olympics played. I'll give you two examples of cultural and political individuality, and these are taken from the opening ceremony of the Games. And here, it's a 5-minute clip, and you might just watch it because if you like British music, it's all about showcasing British popular music as being at the forefront of pop music trends over the last 50 years. So you've going from decade to decade demonstrating these leading artists from the UK, and it's showing that British culture is a pop music cultural crucible. It's the home and the heart of innovative music, and this is demonstrating its importance of a nation. Why else would you have this at the opening ceremony of a sporting event other than to fix into these public diplomacy and soft power strategies? But more obviously, perhaps, there's a part of the opening ceremony which some people criticised, others triumphed, celebrated, was all the focus on the National Health Service, which is the free health service for people in the UK, which was set up after the Second World War and is viewed by many people as a proud bit of British culture. It is. So there we've had cultural and political individuality linked and demonstrated and celebrated and showcased within the opening ceremony to a sporting event, just as a way of, again, public diplomacy, soft power strategizing within this context. So let's look at both of those and think back the degree to which you think those are part of this soft power that's being communicated or being nurtured in this way. Because really, both in terms of music and a public health service, they're communicating to the rest of the world that this Britain is somewhere to be admired culturally and politically. So that's what you've got there. And this is how you can see through the Olympics, business innovation, culture, government, diplomacy and education. Certainly this one here and probably that one there, that's the realms of soft power that are most focused on within these high mega event popular spectacles that the Olympic Games is. But you might be saying to me, well, why on earth is the UK involving itself in these public diploma strategies, 9 billion I should say, for a soft power initiative to try and enhance its appeal around the world, when the UK is already viewed quite highly in this regard? And that's a fair question. Why bother hosting the Olympics if you're already high up the charts in terms of soft power? You're already a leading nation in terms of public diplomacy. Well, the reason is that politicians want to protect and maintain that status. So they can't really get much further up because they're near the top, but they want to protect and maintain it, and they do that by investing in it. And here is Simon Anholt, who talks about this here. A reputation and this high levels of soft power is something you own. You don't own it, you rent it. So in other words, what you have to do, you have to pay your rent on it frequently. You have to reinvest in your high levels of soft power in order to maintain them. And so really what this is, it's not creating its soft power, it's maintaining its high levels of soft power through the hosting of the Olympics. And what they want to do is demonstrate this. Demonstrate through the Olympics that Britain is a rather special place and that emerging economies who are less familiar with the UK should know something about it. So really what the UK is trying to do is demonstrate to those parts of the world that don't hold it in high esteem that it is a nation to be taken seriously and valued and admired. As I said, this is very different from developing nations who are looking to create that, and that's what we're going to look at next. The UK has it established, and really what it's doing is trying to protect or maintain its status by these soft power strategies. Now the London 2012 example I think is very different from these two. Here in this section we're talking about soft power and sport and national rebranding. We're talking about nations, China and Russia, who had established brand identities, symbolic meanings that other people hold for the nation, that they want to address and rework and rebrand. And they've looked to sport and high-level mega-event sport spectacles as a means to try and realise this rebranding of the nation. And so we're going to look at Beijing 2008 and rebranding of Chinese state capitalism, and Sochi 2014 and that rebranding of post-communist Russia, because there were negative associations held by many people, many nations within the rest of the world towards China and Russia previously, and there's attempts to engage in public diplomacy through sport, enhance the soft power to try and rebrand them accordingly. So let's look at China first. Again, what I'm talking about here is a new type of China, a mix of authoritarian state, the communist residues, and a market economy that's increasingly coming to the fore. So you've got this hybrid, a form of Chinese state capitalism. It's not capitalism in the US or UK sense of the term, but it's a more authoritarian, state-driven form of market economy. And that's what they're trying to rebrand to the rest of the world. And China's soft power strategies, Beijing Olympics being one of them, it also includes these things. Buying into Western brands like Smithfield Foods is owned by Chinese interests, and to try and demonstrate its modern nation status. Giving aid to Africa in huge numbers. The Shanghai Expo, the World Exposition, demonstrating China's standing as a modern nation, and the Confucius Institute, which is an institute that's housed in numerous universities around the world that tries to communicate Chinese culture, values and ideas around the world. So these are soft power strategies that the Chinese state is involving itself in and has done for a number of decades in order to increase its soft power and transform its identity within the world as a form of what Kurlansik here calls a charm offensive. So China has been on a charm offensive for a number of years because of the negative connotations that it's had, its image problems over the past, probably 60 years. And these image problems, why it's perceived negatively historically, go around these. Number one being the communist regime, which is viewed very negatively by many parts of the world, human rights issues, religious and political persecution, corruption, media censorship, Tibet occupation, and exports, the poor quality and or dangerous nature of many Chinese exports, which all contributes to a negative view of the Chinese nation around the world. So it's trying to interrupt into this negative branding that Chinese soft power is looking to engage. It's trying to address these image problems. And it's done it in a number of ways, as we said, but the Beijing 2008 Olympics was perhaps the best example of this. And here we see in this video clip an interesting analysis of the Beijing Olympics in general. And what this points to is two things: sport as a form of internal soft power. And we can't overlook this, because what's going on here partly is the Communist Party in China using the games to demonstrate to the Chinese population of its own successes, that it's earned the right to stay in power. Because look, the Chinese government brings the whole world to gasp at what China can do. Here's an indication to the Chinese population. It's a form of internal public diplomacy, how great and how successful the modern Chinese nation is, as brought to you by the Communist Party. So why would you counter, why would you challenge their authority given what they've done for the Chinese nation? So there's an internal political element to it, but we're interested most here in the external element. And really externally, in terms of public diplomacy, the Beijing Olympics were all about setting the scene. They're all about celebrating China as a 21st century superpower, as a modern, thriving, successful nation at the top of that community of nations, because that's how what the Beijing Olympics and the success of it was meant to try and illustrate to the rest of the world, in a similar way that Chinese astronauts going into space did the similar thing. So that was the external goal, the soft power derived from the hosting of the games. And here it's characterized somewhat differently. It was attempting to persuade the world that China is a country to be trusted and admired. That's what they were trying to do from the Olympics, to communicate in high levels of soft power, to shape, change, influence the external view of what the Chinese nation was, to rebrand it in this positive light. And they did it in a number of ways, three main ways. So you saw elements of ancient Chinese culture, expressions of modern China, and Olympic athletic excellence all went together to try and persuade the world that it was a country that could be trusted and admired. So technologically advanced modern China was communicated through the built environment, through the incredible facilities, buildings, be it the media centres, be it the bird's nest, be it the ice cube, the brand new airport, all communicated to the world what a high-tech, innovative culture and society China is. Athletically superior China, through winning the amount of medals that they did, demonstrated to the world, both in the Olympics and the Paralympics, China was a leading sporting and more broadly a leading nation within the world as a whole. And also something that gives nations a sense of security and reassurance, other nations, when we look at ancient identities and ancient histories, and a large part of the way that the Chinese nation was staged to the world through the opening and closing ceremony was focusing on Chinese heritage and culture. Again, was intended to persuade the world that China could be a trusted and admired place based on its history and its ancient heritage. So, there's little doubt, as Grix and Lee say, that China used the Olympics to promote its rise as an emerging power and aid its integration and agency in the international system. This is all about the soft power argument. And whether it worked or not, who knows? But that's the strategy they tried to adopt to further the Chinese nation's position within world international relations, global international relations, I should say. More recently then, we can turn to Sochi 2014, the Winter Olympic Games. And this was part of Putin's strategy to rebrand, I should say, Russia and improve its global standing and perception by positioning it as a democratic, progressive, so now there, and a world open to the nation. So this is what they were attempting to do to address the enduring image problems that Russia has faced around these various things. And where do we start, I guess? Perhaps the authoritarian leadership. The post-communist Putin regime is viewed as being very authoritarian, not particularly open, not particularly focused on freedom and individual rights. So human rights is an issue. Ethnic conflict, violence, terrorism, organised crime, corruption, and an aggressive military. All those contribute to a relatively negative view amongst many nations of Russia more generally. And that's what they were trying to address, partly with the public diplomacy strategies linked to Sochi. And Sochi is just one of a number of sport-related soft power public diplomacy initiatives. They won the 2016 Ice Hockey World Championships and also the right to host the 2018 FIFA World Cup. So you can see there's a clear governmental initiative and impetus to try and get these high-profile events in order that the soft power strategizing can be reworked. But the Sochi Olympics, as many of you may know, was very much Putin's project, and it's a $50 billion project. It vastly dwarfs the amount of costs for other Winter Olympics and indeed Summer Olympics. And it was all about this branding and soft power, improving it for Russia. So it is an effective way, according to Basulto, of projecting soft power on a global scale, hosting an Olympic Games. And the Games were viewed as the quickest path to bolstering Russia's soft power and shifting the perception around the world of the Russian global brand. So this was perceived, and whether you agree with it or not, that was the rationale behind it. Partly the $50 billion investment was to try and improve the brand identity of the nation, which seems a bit crazy perhaps, but that's the way that public diplomacy works. It's a high cost investment. And what it was trying to do, why the $50 billion was the investment, because of the huge amount of costs of infrastructure redevelopment, buildings, roads, energy sources, you name it, in order to demonstrate to the world that Russia is an ultra-modern, forward-thinking and very dynamic nation. That was the idea, and you can see some of that within this video clip. But also, as this Al Jazeera segment shows, it's all about brand Russia. It's all about improving the external perception of brand Russia, and that's what Putin wanted to realize through the Games. And he did this by focusing on a number of different things, or the organizing committee and the governmental initiatives behind it. Geographical beauty, because it does enhance the brand identity of the nation by focusing on the Caucasus Mountains, the beauty of them, in order to shape the widespread external perception of the nation. Modern innovation, as I said. The infrastructure, the buildings, the high-tech venues and facilities demonstrates that Russia isn't a rusting, worn-out hulk. It's a very vibrant, innovative, high-tech nation. And also, rather like China, ancient heritage and culture is identified as well. Combined with the youthful appeal of many athletes, makes the symbolic value of Russian culture, improves it very much. And so what you get from that is this. It can get what it wants, this is the argument, by persuasion, not by coercion. So by all these things, by all these strategies, by all these different focuses, then Russia can help persuade the rest of the world that it is a positive place. It's a place that people should appeal to other people, that as a result people want to aspire to being like and are more likely to support in their initiatives. So they don't have to force them, they're trying to persuade them through soft power to follow the Russian way. Now, whether that was successful or not remains to be seen. However, that, as I said, was the intent. And here's the overall message. You'll see in video clip 6. It's about projecting this image to the world, a Russia that's resurgent, reasserting its place. The message you are meant to get, that Russia is back. And I think that says it all. Interesting, there have been a couple of developments in terms of the Winter Olympics over the past short time. The 2020 games, there were 3 finalists: Almaty in Kazakhstan, Oslo, Norway, Beijing, China, clearly. And recently Oslo withdrew. It wasn't willing to invest in the type of money that Putin demonstrated it would take to host the Winter Olympics now. So what you've got then is a Kazakhstan and a Chinese bids that are still on the table. So we have 2 Asian nations fighting for the right to host the 2020 Winter Olympics. And clearly what's going on there, I think, is both these nations are looking to them to further, to use them as a source of public diplomacy, to further their soft power within the world. And I think it's clear that that's what's going on. Oslo, perhaps not as much. It probably felt that it didn't need to. Norway's got high levels of soft power. Why should it spend upwards of 10, 20, 30 billion dollars to do so, whereas perhaps Almaty and Beijing felt that the investment in it would be worth it. And also, turning to the Summer Olympics, something else to think about. Washington DC is in fact in the middle of the bid process to try and get the US OC's bid to be put forward as the representative of the US as a potential host city for the 2024 games. Now, what is that? Is it an example like Russia, like Sochi, of a rebranding of the nation, or is it more like London, where what Washington and what the USOC potentially could be doing is merely maintaining or preserving the US soft power within the global context? But something to think about anyway. Lastly then, it's all right talking about soft empowerment or soft power, but there's also something we need to consider that's soft disempowerment. And we can't think that just because you use these strategies that they're necessarily going to work, that you host the games and they will improve in the public diplomacy terms your image and credibility and the brand of your nation around the world. There's no guarantee that this will in fact happen. And sometimes what happens is the increased scrutiny and attention from the world that hosting a games gives you leads to the opposite. It exacerbates problems and doesn't alleviate image problems. It makes them worse because people are focused on what's going on in Sochi and Beijing and Athens, wherever it might be, and issues and problems are brought to the attention of the world, and sometimes they are really focused on to the point where the brand identity, the image of the nation, suffers because of it. Now, we could see that here in the counter-narratives related around Beijing. Counter-narratives are the alternative views of the games that were presented, which perhaps negated some of these soft power gains. So the anti-Tibet protests, human rights issues, militarization of the games linked to the militarized nature of Chinese society, and the media censorship, all these things countered the very positive viewpoint of the games that was projected by the hosts. Similarly, in Sochi 24, there were various issues that were brought to the fore. Corruption, repression, dictatorship. Femen here brought this to the fore in their own unique way, as did other protesters who are positioned and critiqued the anti-LGBT laws of Putin's Russia. And here with the Circassian issue, which is a genocide which happened in the 19th century and was brought to the attention of Sochi being the site for a particularly bloody aspect of Russian history. So all these counter-narratives really went against the particular view of Russia through Sochi that the games were trying to project. Now, of course, none of this was helped by, during the latter part of the games, the brewing conflict in the Ukraine was brought to the fore when Russian troops invaded parts of that country, therefore demonstrating some hard power strategies. So the attempts at soft power rebranding were to some degree hurt by the hard power strategies that Putin's military helped to bring to the fore. And as it says here, all of Russia's attempts to use sport to improve its positive image on a global scale will fail as long as its domestic and international policies are in confrontation with the essence of soft power, hard power countering the potentially positive effects of soft power. So, as in Beijing in 2008, so in 2014 in Sochi, there's clearly no guarantee that soft power strategies will work. Things happen. Scrutiny brings evaluation and some negative rebrandings as opposed to positive ones, and so there's no necessary outcome that the host nation will become viewed as being more attractive and therefore influential. So what we're saying here, and this is Brannigan and Giulianotti's work, is yes, there are positive outcomes that come from soft empowerment if it works, but very real negative outcomes can come from soft disempowerment, where the soft power strategies simply aren't effective. Because of this, strategies or scrutinies can render a nation less attractive and therefore less influential, and they can lose, quote, more than they gain in terms of destination image. And it's up to you to think about, did Sochi gain more than it lost? And I'm not really sure. It's up to you to decide. Was it a form of soft empowerment or soft disempowerment that resulted from Sochi 2014 because of what happened there? I'm not sure about that one, but another way that we can look at this process or the potential for soft disempowerment is Qatar, and specifically around the hosting of World Cup 2022. Now Qatar, as you'll read here, is a small nation on the eastern part of the Arabian Peninsula, extremely rich country, very small country in terms of population and size, with a large immigrant population, and one that's been rapidly developed and urbanized over the last few decades. And it wants to assert its place within the world. It's using soft power strategies to do that. Al Jazeera, the media company, is headquartered there, and Qatar Airways, these two commercial forms that are state-run enterprises, are trying to improve or further Qatar's presence and image within the global community. And also it's clearly identified sport as being an important way of doing this. The Qatar state bought Paris Saint-Germain in France. They sponsor FC Barcelona, which gives them huge visibility with the Qatar Airways and the Qatar Foundation on the shirts. And they have numerous tennis, golf tournaments and other major tournaments that are held within Qatar. However, as I mentioned earlier, arguably, well, not arguably, I think the most high-profile event that they're involved in that's part of this soft power strategizing is when they won the right to host Qatar at the World Cup in 2022. And this is how it's thought of being significant for the nation, and how the soft power rationale or justification for their involvement in this World Cup. Number one, I should say number two there, but number one, identifying Qatar as a modern, innovative and technologically advanced society through the World Cup, effectively putting Qatar on the international map, demonstrating that the modern nation it is, where it is, what type of country it is, in and through the World Cup, because the scrutiny, the presence, the focus of the world will be on this place. And to some degree it has been once it won the bid for it. And as I say, this is two. Projecting an image of peace and security and integrity. So what Qatar wants to do is to distance itself from the rest of the Arabian Peninsula and the rest of the Middle East, saying it's a place of peace, security and integrity, which is, you know, a questionable thing to do in many ways, because what it's positioning is the rest of the Middle East being not a place of peace, security and integrity, which is a rather prejudicial way of looking at the rest of the Middle East. But nonetheless, that's part of the strategy that they want to realise, to project that particular image of Qatar as being different. So those are the soft power strategies, the forms of public diplomacy and the rationales behind it that help us understand why this little nation would look to host the World Cup in 2022. So that's the attempt for soft empowerment. But various things have happened that have compromised this strategizing. And we can say that there are sources of soft disempowerment that are threatening to disrupt the rebranding or the branding of this emergent nation. Number one, huge discussions about corruption in the bid process, and this is ongoing, and in the next few months may well come to some type of head that we might get insight into what went on. But there is allegations of corruption that are casting Qatar as certainly a place that isn't one of integrity. Let's put it that way. Secondly, there are discussions about sexual minority discrimination, similar to in Putin's Russia, the anti-LGBT stance of Qatari culture and Qatari society, where homosexual behaviour is illegal. So that's viewed as a negative, that it isn't a place of peace, security and integrity, certainly not if you are a homosexual. Thirdly, the inhospitable climate, which is ridiculously hot and necessitates building stadia that are air conditioned, and in this day and age these seems to be an environmental white elephant, something that we shouldn't be doing. So hosting the tournament in this type of climate would seem absolutely ridiculous. So all these things seem to be countering the positive empowerment of the nation. But most importantly, in terms of the negative effects on the perception of Qatar, is this: the human rights of the workers, the migrant workers who are being used to build these high-tech stadia for 2022. And within this has become a very big issue for various reasons I'll talk about in a second. And the reason being that there's a kafala system within Qatar where the sponsoring employer of a migrant worker basically controls that worker's visa and their legal status. So they can't separate from them for fear of being thrown out of the country. So that means that they've got total control over these workers, and there's been many cases of exploitation and abuse of these workers because they have no redress. They can't complain because they've got the owner of them basically. The employer, who is the owner of these migrant workers, has total control over them and can basically tell them to do what they want. So you can see they've got very few human rights, and the exploitation and abuse is rife amongst this population. And this is where the migrant workers are coming from. And as you may well know, this exploitation and abuse has had very deadly consequences. And it's estimated that there have been already, between 2012 and 2013, 1,000 fatalities of workers on the stadium, building these stadiums for 2022. I mean, it's a huge amount of people. I mean, it's an incredible amount of people who are migrant workers from these nations, nearly 1,000 of which from Nepal, India and Bangladesh alone, that have died over the last few years. And as you'll see in this ESPN segment on this whole issue, it's estimated that if things don't improve, more than 4,000 workers will die before a ball is kicked in 2022, and the kafala system was likened to a slave state in the 21st century. So clearly there's a huge global negative perception of Qatar because of these exploitative and abusive and highly dangerous working conditions that these migrant workers are putting, that has led to this many deaths. And as a result, there's a no World Cup without workers' rights, rerun the vote, various forms of protest movements against Qatar's hosting the World Cup. And these may gain more traction if something about this isn't done in the near future. But what this points to, in conclusion, I guess, is that Qatar is on the cusp of soft empowerment or disempowerment. And as it says here, these things need to be addressed swiftly if Qatar is to maintain its international credibility. Because a modern nation state that's supposed to be full of integrity, high-tech innovation, a modern society cannot have this level of lack of human rights of its workers and dangerous nature at the workplace. Can't exist for it to maintain credibility to the international community. Simply can't happen. And if it does continue, then I think something's going to happen, and the potential positive soft power benefits of hosting the World Cup will be totally lost. And I would even say among certain people, or some people, they already have been lost, because 1,000 people dying is an incredible number, and it is an absolute scandal that that's allowed to take place. And if it gets worse, as I said, then perhaps more people will join the anti-Qatar viewpoint, and the perception of the nation within the international community won't rise, it will fall. So, in summary, what we've looked at then is these sports spectacles and how the role that they potentially play within international relations, and they're linked to public diplomacy and soft power, because part of the reason for hosting them is because of these particular initiatives and the attempts to rebrand nations within and through the sports spectacle. Now, this is true for both established nations, but it's perhaps even more true for these emergent or aspiring nations that are trying to stamp their position and influence within the global community. However, as we've seen here, soft power cannot be guaranteed. Beijing, Sochi, Qatar 2022 all demonstrate that there are very many things that can go into play that can negate the potential rebranding strategies, the soft power benefits that derive from hosting the games. I would say that we don't often think about the relationship between these major sports spectacles and public diplomacy, but I think it's there, and we need to really rethink about how we perceive these global events and global spectacles in light of this, because while economic factors, as we'll see in the next topic, are key, they are closely related to this political element as well, and international relations are an important part of why nations are involved and investing so heavily in hosting such events. Okay, that's it. You get to these now and we'll go from there. See you next time.